Daf Yomi, Tractate, Bava Metzia, page 51a, top of the page, with the words Mishum Hachi Chazru. It is due to this reason that they reverted to following the statement of the rabbis, as the sellers were in any event able to renege at any point. Rabbi Tarfon extended the period during which the buyers could renege on the transaction. But if you say that the legal status of a seller is also limited like that of a buyer in terms of the period of time during which he may renege, what difference is there to the merchants? Just as the sages instituted an ordinance on behalf of a buyer enabling him to renege on the transaction, so too the sages instituted an ordinance on behalf of a seller. And the time afforded to the seller is equal to the time afforded to the buyer. The fact that Rabbi Tarfon, see here, drop my mouse here. Where was I? Rabbi Tarfon, the fact that Rabbi Tarfon extended this time would not be a reason for the merchants to revert to following the opinion of the rabbis, as there is a benefit and a loss for the merchants according to both opinions. The Gemara answers, with regard to the opinion of the merchants of Lod, it is rare for them to err, and therefore they preferred limiting the period during which the buyer could renege over extending the period during which they themselves could renege. The Gemara relates, the landlord of Rami Bar Chama sold the donkey and erred in fixing its price. Rami Bar Chama encountered him and noticed that he was sad. Rami Bar Chama said to him, "Why are you sad?" The landlord said to him, "I sold a donkey and I erred in fixing its price." Rami Bar Chama said to him, "Go and renege on the transaction." The landlord said to him, "I have waited more than the period of time that it takes for me to show the merchandise to a merchant or to my relative." Rami Bar Chama sent the landlord before Rav Nachman for a ruling, and Rav Nachman said to him, "The sages taught this halacha only with regard to a buyer, but a seller may always renege on the transaction." The Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? The Gemara explains, a buyer has his merchandise in his possession. Therefore, anywhere that he goes, he shows it to those familiar with the market price, and they tell him whether he erred or whether he did not err. A seller who does not have his merchandise in his possession can ascertain the market price only when merchandise like his merchandise happens to come before him, and only then will he know whether he erred or whether he did not err. The Gemara relates, there was a certain man who had silk strips to sell. He announced that he was selling them for 6 ma'ah and they were worth 5. And if they would give him 5.5 ma'ah, he would take it and sell the silk. This man, a potential buyer, came and said to himself, if I give him 5.5 ma'ah, it is a case of a waiver, and I will not be entitled to recover the difference. I will give him 6 ma'ah and claim from him by law the return of the sum gained by the exploitation. He did so. The case came before Rava, who said to him, the sages taught this halacha of exploitation only with regard to one who buys merchandise from a merchant. But one who buys merchandise from a regular homeowner does not have a claim of exploitation against him. The Gemara relates a similar incident. There was a certain man who was holding jewelry to sell. He announced that he was selling it for 60 ma'ah and it was worth 50 ma'ah. And if they would give him 55 ma'ah, he would take it and sell the jewels. This man, a potential buyer, came and said to himself, if I give him 55 ma'ah, it is a case of a waiver, and I will not be entitled to recover the difference. I will give him 60 ma'ah and claim from him by law the return of the sum gained by the exploitation. He did so. The case came before Rav Chisda, who said to him, the sages taught this halakha of exploitation only with regard to one who buys merchandise from a merchant, but one who buys merchandise from a regular homeowner does not have a claim of exploitation against him. Rav Dimi said to Rav Chisda, the ruling is correct. And likewise, Rabbi Elazar said the ruling is correct. The Gemara asks, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah that follows, just as the halachot of exploitation can apply to a layman, lehediot, so do the halachot of exploitation apply to a merchant. Who is the layman to whom the Mishnah is referring? Is he not a regular homeowner as opposed to a merchant? Rav Chisda said that Mishnah is referring to simple linen garments, which the homeowner crafts expressly for sale. But with regard to vessels and garments designed for the personal use of a homeowner, which are important to him, he sells them only to receive extra money, as people are generally hesitant to part with their belongings. Therefore, when purchasing an item from a homeowner, a buyer must consider the likelihood that his asking price is greater than the item's actual worth. New Mishnah. The Mishnah says, but both the buyer and the seller are subject to the halachot of exploitation. Just as the halachot of exploitation apply to a layman, so do the halachot of exploitation apply to a merchant. It should be the opposite, no? Just as they apply to a merchant, it should apply to a layman. Anyway, Rabbi Yehuda says there is no exploitation for a merchant, as he is an expert in the market price of merchandise. The one upon whom the exploitation was imposed has the advantage. If he wishes, he can say to the other, give me back my money, and nullify the transaction. Or he can say, give me back the sum that you gained by exploiting me. Gemara, the Talmud says, from where are these matters derived, that both the buyer and the seller are subject to the halacha of exploitation, of ona'ah? As the sages taught concerning the verse, and if you sell your colleague an item that is sold, or acquire from your colleague's hand, you shall not exploit his brother. Leviticus 25:14. I have derived only a case where a buyer was exploited. From where do I derive that the halakha is the same in a case where the seller was exploited? It's the same verse states, or acquire from your colleague hand. You shall not exploit his brother. The Gemara comments, and it was necessary to write the prohibition against exploitation with regard to a buyer, and it was necessary to write the prohibition of exploitation with regard to a seller. As, had the merciful one written this prohibition only with regard to a seller, one would conclude that it is prohibited for him because he is certain of the value of his merchandise. But with regard to a buyer who is not certain of the value of the seller's merchandise, say that the merciful one did not render it prohibited for him to engage in exploitation with the verse, you shall not exploit. And had the merciful one written this prohibition only with regard to a buyer, one would conclude that it is prohibited for him because he acquires the item and he benefits from his purchase. As people say, if you purchase an item, you acquired a durable item for yourself. But with regard to a seller who loses from the sale, as people say, one who sells an item loses. Say that the merciful one did not render it prohibited for him to engage in exploitation with the verse, you shall not exploit. Therefore, it was necessary for the Torah to write this prohibition with regard to both parties to the transaction. The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Yehuda says there is no exploitation for a merchant. The Gemara expresses surprise at this statement. due to the fact that he is a merchant, he is not subject to the halachot of exploitation. Anyone could arrive at a mistaken assessment of the value of merchandise. The value of merchandise. It's a big daf. Rav Nachman says that Rav says it is with regard to a merchant who is a trader who buys and sells merchandise that they taught this halacha. What is the reason that he is not subject to halachot of exploitation according to Yehuda? He knows how much his merchandise is worth. He waives the sum of the disparity between the value and the price for the buyer. And the reason why he sells the merchandise in that manner, knowing that he is selling it for less than its value, is due to the fact that other merchandise happens to become available to him and he needs the money to purchase that item. The Gemara asks, but now, in any event, he retracts from the transaction, indicating that he did not waive the sum of the disparity. Rav Ashi said, what is the meaning of there is no exploitation for a merchant? He is not subject to the principles of exploitation at all, as even the disparity is less than the measure of exploitation, meaning less than 1/6. He may renege on the transaction since his entire livelihood is based on the slight profit margin that he earns from each transaction. He does not waive even that sum. The Gemara comments, it is taught in a Braita, in accordance with the opinion of Rav Nachman, Rabbi Yehuda says there is no exploitation for a merchant because he is expert in these matters. The Mishnah teaches the one upon whom the exploitation was imposed has the advantage. If he wishes, he can say to the other, give me back my money and nullify the transaction, or he can say, give me back the sum that you gained by exploiting me. The Gemara asks, whose opinion is expressed in the Mishnah? It is neither the opinion of Rabbi Natan nor the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. The Gemara explains, if it is the opinion of Rabbi Natan, in the Mishnah, the Tana teaches, if he wishes, he can say, give me back my money and nullify the transaction, or he can say, give me back the sum that you gained by exploiting me. And in the Braita 50b, Rabbi Natan does not teach if he wishes, indicating that the transaction takes effect regardless of his wishes. And if it is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi in the Mishnah, the Tana teaches the halacha with regard to the buyer, and the Braita Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi teaches in a case where the seller was exploited. The seller is at an advantage, apparently to the exclusion of the buyer. The simon is Zavrash. The Zavrash. Maybe I'll do a separate thing for that. Okay, the Gemara presents a mnemonic. No, just continue. The Gemara presents a mnemonic device for the sages to discuss his difficulties. Zion referring to Rabbi Lazar, Beit referring to Rabbah, Reish referring to Rabbah, Shin referring to Ravashi. Rabbi Lazar says concerning the halacha of exploitation in the Mishnah, I do not know who taught it, as it does not correspond to the opinion of any of the sages. Rabbah said actually the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Natan, and amend and teach that Rabbi Natan stated in the Braita as well if he wishes. Rava said actually the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and the ruling that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi omits in the Mishnah he explicates in the Braita. The Mishnah and the Braita are complementary. Rav Ashi said the language of the Mishnah is also precise, as the Tana teaches both the buyer and the seller, and then the proceeds to elucidate the halacha of the buyer. Learn from it that the Tana indeed omitted the halacha of the seller, but he did not exclude the seller from the halacha. The Gemara affirms, learn from it that this is the case. I think we'll stop here at 15, and let's do. It was stated. We lost some time. 15 right now. Yeah, we'll just do a small piece.